He lived a life that looked ordinary from every angle. To anyone passing by, he was just another person walking home from work. Carrying a small bag, head slightly down, steps steady and calm. Nothing about him looked extraordinary. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room. He didn't talk much. He didn't show off. He didn't chase attention. He simply did what needed to be done, quietly, carefully, without expecting anything in return. People around him often said he was too calm for this world, but he didn't mind. He had learned long ago that silence protects peace. His days followed almost the same pattern every morning and every evening. He woke up before the sun, even though he barely slept enough. He made tea for himself, sometimes adding a little extra sugar when he felt tired. He checked his phone, hoping for no new problems, no new bills, no new responsibilities waiting to fall on him. Then he got ready for work, a simple job that paid just enough to keep life going, but not enough to make it easy. On the way to work, he usually took the same road. A narrow street lined with old shops, a bakery that smelled like warm bread, and a fruit seller who always greeted him with a smile. He would nod back politely. He never bought anything in the morning, saving every little coin he could. People noticed he lived with discipline, but no one knew why. At work, he blended into the background. He was the kind of person who didn't create problems, didn't argue, didn't complain. If someone asked for help, he said yes. If someone didn't finish their job, he quietly finished it for them. His coworkers liked him, but they didn't know him deeply. They only saw the surface, polite, kind, dependable. What they didn't see were the signs of stress behind his eyes, the exhaustion in his shoulders, or the way he sometimes paused to catch his breath because his mind carried too many worries. He always kept a small notebook in his pocket. No one knew what was inside it. Some thought it was a diary, others guessed it was a list of reminders, but he never showed it to anyone. Inside that notebook were notes, calculations, reminders of things he couldn't afford to forget, dates of payments he needed to make, lists of things he had to fix, small messages to himself like, "Don't worry, you'll figure it out in one more day, keep going." He never mentioned these struggles to anyone. He carried them alone. His family loved him, but they never saw how much he sacrificed. They assumed he was doing fine because he never complained. When his siblings needed something, he said, "I'll handle it." When a neighbor needed help, he said, "No problem." When someone asked if he was okay, he smiled and said, "I'm good." He repeated those two words so many times that people simply believed them. But inside, things were different. Some nights he stayed awake long after everyone else slept. He sat by the small window in his room, staring at the streetlight outside, thinking about everything he had to manage. There were piles of responsibilities he never chose, but accepted because someone needed to handle them. He was the type of person who couldn't walk away. He didn't know how to say no. He believed that if he didn't do it, no one else would. He often skipped meals without telling anyone. He would say he already ate or wasn't hungry, even though the truth was he wanted to save the little money he had. He sold some of his personal belongings over time: an old watch, jacket he once loved, even a few books he collected in. No one noticed. He did it quietly without making a sound. Once his friend at work asked, "You seem tired. Are you okay?" He smiled and replied, "Just didn't sleep well." That was his answer to everything. But his tiredness came from something deeper, something no one else knew. He carried the weight of a situation that had been building slowly over months. A situation he never wanted to burden anyone with. He kept telling himself he would find a solution. He just needed more time. That hope kept him moving, even when it hurt. Every evening after work, he took a longer route home. People assumed he liked walking, but the truth was that he needed a few minutes to breathe before stepping into the house. He didn't want anyone to see worry on his face. He didn't want his problems to become someone else's, so he walked slowly, letting the air settle his thoughts. Sometimes he bought a small snack and ate it quietly, not because he wanted it, but because it helped him forget everything for a moment. At home, he behaved like nothing was wrong. He smiled, asked about everyone's day, helped with chores, and fixed whatever needed fixing. He made sure everyone else felt comfortable, even if he wasn't. He knew people depended on him. He didn't want to disappoint anyone. He often listened more than he spoke. People found comfort in telling him their problems because he was patient and calm. They never realized he was struggling with problems of his own, problems much heavier than he let anyone believe. But he didn't want sympathy. He didn't want questions. He didn't want anyone to worry. He believed that sharing his burden would only make others anxious, and he hated the idea of causing stress to anyone he cared about. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he would receive calls. He stepped outside quietly, careful not to wake anyone. The conversations were always short, always serious. He spoke in a low voice, often saying things like, "I'll manage, don't worry, or I'll send it soon." These late-night calls were another part of his hidden world. He hung up, took a long breath, and stood outside for a moment, letting the cool night air calm him before going back inside. He couldn't let anyone hear stress in his voice. One evening, when he came home, he found a small envelope pushed under the door. He knew what it was even before opening it. Another bill. Another amount he had to find a way to pay. He took it inside quietly, folded it neatly, and kept it in his notebook. He didn't sigh, didn't complain, didn't show a reaction. He just added it to the list of things he had to handle alone. There were moments when he almost opened up. Moments when someone asked, "Is everything all right?" And he paused, thinking maybe he should tell the truth. Maybe someone would understand. Maybe someone would offer help. But then he remembered the stress other people already carried. He didn't want to add more weight to their lives. So he swallowed the truth, smiled, and said, "I'm fine." Even when life felt too heavy, he kept moving. He believed that one day, when things settled, he would finally rest. He imagined a moment in the future where he could breathe without worry, where the weight on his shoulders wouldn't feel so crushing. That hope kept him going through the toughest days. No one around him could see. The long nights he spent thinking about solutions. No one saw him sitting at the table with his head in his hands, trying to calculate how to stretch his income. No one saw the small sacrifices he made every single day. He never talked about these things. He simply carried the load to the world. He looked like a normal person living a simple routine. But behind that calm presence was a story no one knew, a struggle no one understood, and a level of sacrifice no one imagined. He sacrificed, quietly, silently, without saying a single word on. And no one, not a single person, had any idea what he was going through, even though he hid everything so well. The truth was that his hidden struggle had started long before anyone noticed a change in him. It didn't happen suddenly. It grew slowly, like a shadow that kept getting longer each day. He didn't plan for life to turn so complicated. But life has a way of piling problems on people who already carry too much. It started with one unexpected bill, then another, then someone in the family needed medical help. Then a job issue appeared. Then a loan reminder came. Slowly, quietly, these responsibilities began stacking up. Anyone else might have panicked or told someone, but he wasn't like that. He believed in solving things himself, even if it meant breaking himself a little every day. His struggle wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was the kind that chips away at a person silently through sleepless nights, skipped meals, and long moments of worrying alone. He believed that if he worked harder, took an extra shift, and controlled every small expense, he could handle everything. He refused to ask for help. Maybe pride was part of it, but mostly it was love. He didn't want anyone in his family to feel guilty or pressured. One night, after work, he sat in his room with the old notebook open in front of him. The pages were filled with dates, numbers, reminders, and lines scratched out again and again. He was trying to make sense of his expenses and the responsibilities he had accepted. But no matter how many times he calculated, the result stayed the same. He needed more than he had. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead. His eyes stung from the long hours and lack of rest. The room was quiet except for the sound of a ceiling fan that rotated slowly. He stared at the notebook like it could magically change if he looked long enough. Deep down, he knew he couldn't keep going like this forever. But he kept telling himself, just a little longer. You can manage. One more month. That was his pattern. Every time things got worse, he pushed the deadline further. believing he could somehow pull himself out of the mess. The people around him noticed small changes, but didn't know how to read them. He laughed less. He avoided long conversations. He spent more time outside, sitting alone on a bench near the local market, pretending to watch people, when in reality, he was trying to calm his thoughts. Sometimes he sat by the tea shop with a cup in his hand that slowly cooled because he was too lost in his worries to drink it. His close ones occasionally asked, "Is everything okay with you? You seem different?" He always smiled and replied, "I'm just tired. Nothing else." That answer worked every time, but his hidden struggle kept growing. One day, his manager at work announced that overtime hours might be reduced for a few months. The moment he heard that, his heart dropped. Overtime was the only reason he managed to keep up with his commitments. Without it, he wasn't sure how he would pay everything on time. He didn't show his fear. He nodded, pretending it was fine, but inside his thoughts were spinning. When he walked out of the workplace that day, the street felt louder, the sunlight felt weaker, and every sound around him felt heavier. He took a long walk before going home. He stopped near a small bridge, leaned on the railing, and looked down at the slow-moving water. He wished life could slow down the same way. He checked his phone and saw a message he had been avoiding. Another reminder. Another due date approaching. He locked his phone quickly and slipped it back into his pocket, like hiding it could make the problem go away. One evening, when he came home, he found his family talking about future plans, repairs they wanted to do in the house. Things they wished to buy, small dreams they hoped for. He listened quietly, nodding at the right moments. But inside, he felt like he was sinking. They didn't know he was barely holding everything together. They didn't know the house repairs they wanted were the last thing he could afford. They didn't know he had already sacrificed his personal needs again and again just to keep things stable. He felt torn. He wanted them to dream. He wanted them to stay hopeful. But he also felt the weight of being the one who had to make those dreams possible. Late that night, after everyone slept, he sat outside on the steps. The street was quiet under the dim glow of the lamppost. He looked up at the sky, trying to find comfort in the stars, even though clouds covered most of them. He wished he could ask for help. He wished someone could understand, but he couldn't bring himself to open up. He remembered a moment from his childhood. How he once broke a toy and hid the pieces because he was scared of disappointing anyone. Even as a child, he had learned to hide pain. Maybe that habit never left him. In the following weeks, things became even more complicated. His expenses increased again. Someone from the family needed urgent help, and he didn't hesitate. He used the last of his savings, thinking he could rebuild it later. But later never came. Instead, new responsibilities arrived. He started working extra hours where he could, sometimes late into the night. He returned home, dragging his feet, shoulders tired, eyes half closed. But before entering the house, he straightened his posture, washed his face, and put on a small smile. He didn't want anyone to see how exhausted he really was. One day he received a call during work. When he heard the voice on the other side, he closed his eyes for a moment. It was another request. Something he hadn't planned for. Something he couldn't refuse. "Okay," he said softly. "I'll handle it." He always said those 3 words. After the call ended, he sat in silence. He didn't cry. He didn't break down. He just stared at the floor, feeling a deep heaviness spreading inside him. But even then, he didn't think of giving up. He only thought of what he needed to do next. His life had become a long stretch of sacrifices, small ones, big ones, invisible ones. He gave up personal plans. He stopped buying new clothes. He ignored his own health. He avoided outings with friends because he didn't want to spend money. He skipped meals quietly. He sold things he once valued. And still, he told no one, every day felt like a balancing act. One wrong step and everything could fall apart. But he kept going, believing that if he stayed strong, his efforts would one day make life easier for the people he loved. One afternoon, as he walked home, he passed by a shop window and saw his reflection. He stopped. For the first time in months, he really looked at himself. He saw the tired eyes, the weight on his shoulders, the forced calmness. He barely recognized the person staring back. He wondered how long he could keep pretending everything was fine. He took a deep breath and kept walking. He reached home and acted normal, like he always did. But inside, a storm was growing. Quietly, a storm made of fears he never voiced, responsibilities he never shared, and sacrifices he made without expecting anything in return. And through all of it, he still believed he could handle everything alone. He didn't know that one small moment, coming soon, would start revealing the truth. He had hidden for so long, the truth he'd spent months trying to bury, the truth he believed no one would ever discover. Life has a strange way of pushing a person to their limits quietly, without warning. For months, he had been balancing everything on his own bills, responsibilities, late-night calls, unexpected problems, and the constant pressure of keeping everyone around him happy. He had become so used to carrying the weight alone that he didn't realize how heavy it had become. Then came the moment that forced him to make the biggest sacrifice of all. It began on a morning that looked normal. He woke up early, made tea, and sat by the window for a few minutes. The sky was still dark, but a soft blue color was spreading slowly. It was the kind of morning that made everything look peaceful. But inside, he felt no peace. He stared at the steam rising from his cup. Thinking about all the responsibilities waiting for him that day, he checked his notebook again. The pages were filled more than ever. Too many reminders. Too many deadlines. Too many things depending on him. He flipped through the pages slowly, hoping maybe he missed a solution somewhere. But the numbers didn't change. The truth stayed the same. He was running out of time. He took a deep breath, closed the notebook, and got ready for work that day. Everything felt heavier. His walk to work felt longer. His steps were slow, not because he was tired physically, but because his mind was exhausted from trying to problem-solve endlessly. The people he passed greeted him like always, but he only managed small nods. His thoughts were too tangled to respond properly at work. He tried to stay focused, but his mind kept drifting. He kept thinking about the latest problem he couldn't solve, the one that required a large amount of money urgently, an amount he didn't have, an amount he couldn't earn in time. And it wasn't for himself. It was for someone he cared about deeply, someone who didn't even know that he was responsible for fixing it. In the afternoon, he received a call. He stepped outside, away from everyone, and answered quietly. The voice on the other end sounded worried. Something had happened, something that made the situation even more complicated. He listened silently, his fingers tightening around the phone. When the call ended, he stood still for a long moment. The sounds of the street faded around him. Even the air felt heavier. He realized he had only one option left, a difficult option, a painful one. But it was the only way to keep things from falling apart for the person he cared about. He walked back inside, doing his best to appear normal, but inside him, something had shifted. After work, instead of going home, he went somewhere else, a place he didn't usually visit unless things were truly serious. It was a small office on a quiet road, with an old signboard hanging crookedly outside. He hesitated at the door for a few seconds, then stepped in. He sat across from a man who looked through some papers silently. Then the man looked up and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" He nodded slowly. "This will change things for you." The man warned gently. "I know," he replied, "and you'll have nothing left for yourself for a long time." "I understand." The man studied him for a moment. "Is it worth it?" He looked down at his hands. For a brief moment, he pictured the person he was protecting, their smile, their trust, their innocence, the peace they had because they didn't know the storm he was facing in the background. "Yes," he said softly, "it's worth it." The man nodded, pulled out some papers, and began the process. What he agreed to that day was something that would affect his life for years. A sacrifice no one knew about. A choice that would take away the last bit of comfort he had left. He signed the paper quietly, without hesitation. It wasn't about him anymore. It never had been. When he walked out of the office, His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what he had done. He walked slowly, trying to process everything. He had just given up the little savings he had, agreed to take on extra responsibilities, and made a long commitment that would affect every part of his life. But he didn't regret it. On the way home, he stopped at a small bench near the street. He sat down and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. For the first time in months, he let out a long, deep breath, almost like he had been holding it inside for too long. The street was alive with people walking, talking, laughing, buying food, and children running around. Life was moving as usual. Even though his own life had just changed drastically, he watched the world around him feeling strangely invisible. No one knew what he had done. No one knew what he had given up, and he preferred it that way. That evening, when he reached home, he acted normal. He didn't show any sign of the sacrifice he had made. He laughed with the family, helped with small chores, and sat with them like nothing unusual had happened. He hid his tiredness, hid his stress, hid everything. One evening, he sat outside again, the same steps where he once sat alone, staring at the streetlight. But this time, he wasn't thinking about problems. He was thinking about how different things felt now. He wasn't carrying everything alone. The sky was beautiful that night. A soft breeze moved through the street. For the first time in a very long time, he felt a small sense of peace washing over him. He realized something important. Sacrifices done in silence are powerful. But sometimes, allowing others to stand beside you is also an act of strength. He didn't regret anything he had done. He didn't regret the silent sacrifices. But he finally understood that he didn't need to disappear behind them. People cared. People noticed. People wanted to help. And that simple realization changed his life more than any sacrifice ever had. But the story wasn't over yet, because soon, something unexpected would happen. Something that would show him a side of life he never expected to see. A moment that would make him understand just how deeply he was valued. He stood outside. The small house he had worked so hard to protect. The early morning air felt soft, almost gentle, as if the world itself understood what he had been through. The sky had a light gray color, with the sun trying to break through the thin clouds. He breathed in slowly, letting the cool air calm the emotions he had been holding inside for so long. For the first time in months, he wasn't rushing anywhere. There was no more secret task waiting for him, no hidden struggle he needed to fix alone. Everything was out in the open now, and that changed something deep inside him. Inside the house, the quiet sound of breakfast being prepared could be heard. Someone was humming softly, and it made the entire space feel warm. He stepped in, and when he walked through the doorway, he saw faces turning toward him. Not with confusion, not with worry, but with gratitude. Real gratitude. The kind that comes from understanding someone's silent pain. No one said anything at first. They just looked at him. It was the kind of moment where words weren't needed. He had explained everything the day before the long nights. The sacrifices, the money he had saved, the chances he had let go of, and the heavy burden he had kept to himself, so no one else would be affected. It had taken courage to say those things out loud. For years, he had locked those truths deep inside, believing that silence was a form of protection. But now that everything had been revealed, he felt lighter. Someone walked up to him with a cup of tea, placed it gently in his hand, and gave him a look filled with emotion. Not pity, not sadness. Just pure respect. He didn't know how to react. He simply nodded and smiled softly. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. He had spent most of his life blending in, staying quiet, doing his job, and carrying his responsibilities until his shoulders felt like stone. Being seen like this, it felt new, almost strange. They all sat down together for breakfast. It was simple bread, eggs, tea, and a few warm dishes, but it felt like the most comforting meal he had eaten in a long time. The air in the room felt peaceful. Normally, he would eat quickly and leave early to solve whatever issue lay ahead, but not today. Today he took his time. He listened to the soft laughter around him. He watched the way the morning light entered through the window and fell across the table. He noticed things he had ignored many times before because he had been too tired, too stressed, too focused on doing everything alone. Someone asked him if he was tired, and he let out a soft laugh. Yes, he was tired. But for the first time, it was the kind of tiredness that didn't feel heavy anymore. It was the kind of tiredness that comes after a long journey, when you finally reach the place you were trying to get to, after breakfast. He stepped outside again, but this time he wasn't alone. They followed him out, standing next to him in the morning light. There was no blame in their eyes, no anger for being kept in the dark. Instead, they admired him for everything he quietly gave up. They understood now why he had seemed distant sometimes, why he had stayed up late, why he had taken second jobs, why he had ignored his own needs. It all made sense now. One of them placed a hand on his shoulder. "You should have told us," they said softly. He looked down at the ground and smiled gently. "I didn't want anyone to worry," he replied. "That's exactly why we wish you had told us," they said back, their voice warm. "You didn't have to go through all of that alone. You knew they were right." Maybe he should have shared the burden. But he also knew himself he had always been the kind of person who carried responsibilities quietly. Someone who believed that love meant keeping others safe from worry. He wasn't sure he could have done things differently, but now things would change. Not because he wanted attention or repayment, but because the people around him wanted to support him the way he had supported them. They wanted to make sure he never felt alone again. Later that day, they planned a small gathering for him. Nothing huge, nothing loud, just family, close friends, and simple decorations in the backyard. When he walked out and saw the candles, the lights, and the smiling faces, he almost felt shy. He didn't think he deserved any of it. He had never done anything for a reward. He had done it because it felt right. But they insisted that he deserved appreciation, even if it was small. Someone gave a short speech, talking about how his quiet strength kept the entire family together. Another person shared how his sacrifice had saved them from losing everything. People spoke from the heart, not to make him emotional, but to let him know that his actions mattered. He didn't cry, but he felt something deep in his chest. A warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. He realized that love didn't mean hiding everything. Sometimes love meant letting others help too. As the evening went on, he found himself laughing. Real laughter, the kind he hadn't heard from his own mouth in years. The stars above were bright, and the gentle breeze made the light sway softly. It felt like a fresh start, like a chapter closing and another one opening quietly. He stood off to the side for a moment, looking at everyone. They were talking, smiling, and enjoying the peaceful night. The house behind them glowed warmly. It was safe. They were safe. And he had played a big part in that. Someone walked up to him and asked if he needed anything. He shook his head and said, "No, everything is perfect." And he meant it. The night continued with soft music, small plates of food, and gentle conversations. There was no drama, no tension, only a sense of understanding that had grown between them. Each person silently promised themselves that they would never let him carry everything alone again. As the celebration came to an end, he took one last look at the backyard. The candles were slowly burning out, the lights were dimming, and people were heading inside. He felt full not of food, but of peace. He locked that feeling inside his heart, a reminder that even the quietest sacrifices can be seen eventually. And when they are seen, they become something beautiful. When he finally went to his room, sat on the edge of the bed, and closed his eyes. The silence felt gentle this time, not heavy like before. He thought about everything he had done, the long hours, the painful choices, the dreams he had paused, and he didn't regret any of it. But now, he also knew something he had ignored for years. He was allowed to rest too. The moonlight touched the floor as he lay back and let himself breathe fully. For the first time in a long time, he felt safe enough to simply be human. No burdens, no secrets. Just a man who gave everything he had, not for praise, but because he cared deeply. And now finally, those he cared for understood the truth. He didn't sacrifice everything for applause. He sacrificed everything because he loved. And even though he never said it out loud, his actions spoke louder than any words ever could. It was the end of his silent battle. and the beginning of a peaceful life where he no longer had to hide his heart. Later that night, he sat alone in his room, looking at the notebook again. He turned to a fresh page and wrote down new responsibilities, new dates, new reminders. The list felt endless, but he didn't complain. He whispered to himself, "It's okay. You'll manage." He always told himself that. Over the next few days, he worked even harder. He picked up extra shifts whenever possible. He walked instead of taking transport to save money. He skipped breakfast sometimes. He stopped buying small treats for himself. He sold another one of his belongings quietly. He even began doing small side jobs after work. Things that paid a little but added up over time. His routine became tougher, longer hours, shorter sleep. But he didn't slow down. He knew he had to stay strong. The sacrifice he made was big, and now he had to live with it. He reminded himself that the person he was protecting was worth everything. People around him noticed the change. They noticed he was more tired than usual, that he rarely sat down to rest, that he was always in a hurry, and that his smile had become weaker. Some asked him again, "Are you sure you're okay?" His answer never changed. "I'm fine." One evening, while returning home, he felt a sudden wave of exhaustion. He stopped walking and leaned against a wall, closing his eyes. The streetlights flickered gently above him. For a moment, he wondered how much more he could handle. His body felt heavy. His mind felt overloaded. But he didn't consider giving up. He simply needed a moment to breathe. He straightened up again, kept walking. Every night became a battle between sleep and stress. He often stayed awake until late, thinking about whether he had made the right choice. But each time he pictured the person he helped, their smile, their peace, he knew he had done the right thing. He didn't want recognition. He didn't want anyone to feel guilty. He didn't want to explain. He only wanted the people he loved to live without worry. His sacrifices were never meant to be visible. They were meant to protect. They were meant to give others the comfort he himself no longer had. He gave up parts of his life quietly, without telling anyone, because that's who he was. Someone who carried pain silently. Someone who chose burden over burdening others. Someone who believed that love wasn't about words, but actions done in silence. Months passed like this, with him juggling everything alone, never complaining, never resting. But life has a way of revealing truths when least expected, and soon. The truth he had hidden so carefully, every sacrifice, every struggle, every silent choice would start to come to light, not because he wanted it, but because someone, by pure accident, was about to discover the reality he had been hiding for so long. The truth always finds a way out, even when a person spends months hiding it. For him, it happened unexpectedly on a day that began like any other. There was nothing special about that morning. No warning, no sign. Just the usual routine. He woke up early, as always. He made tea quietly. He checked his notebook, added a few reminders, and folded it back into his pocket. He breathed in deeply before stepping out of the house, preparing himself for another long day. He didn't know that this day would be the beginning of people discovering what he had been hiding. Everything started when he reached work and realized he had forgotten his notebook at home. That notebook had always been with him everywhere he went, in every hour of the day. It was the only place where his real life was written down. But that morning, in his hurry, he left it on the table near his bed. He didn't notice until he reached the workplace and reached into his pocket to check something. His hand touched air. He stood still for a moment, feeling his heart skip. The notebook was the one thing he never forgot. Leaving it behind made him uneasy, but he told himself it was fine. No one usually entered his room anyway, but fate had different plans. At home, someone found the notebook while cleaning. It didn't look like anything special, just an old worn-out little book. The cover was faded. The pages inside were slightly bent from months of use. Out of curiosity, they picked it up, thinking maybe it was a simple diary or a list of chores. They opened it, and everything began to unravel. Inside, they found dates, due amounts, loan reminders, payments he had made for others, medical costs he had covered quietly. and notes about responsibilities no one knew he had taken on. They found messages he wrote to himself, short lines like, "Stay strong, don't give up. They don't need to know, and you can handle it." There were lists of things he had sold, notes of extra work he had done at night, reminders of calls he needed to return, and scribbled calculations showing how he had stretched every bit of money to make everything work at first. They stared at the pages in confusion. Then realization slowly washed over them. The truth hit them harder with every page. This quiet man, who never complained, who always smiled, who always said he was fine, had been carrying a mountain of responsibilities alone. They sat still for a long time, going through each line, slowly understanding the depth of his sacrifices. Every page felt like discovering another layer of his silent pain. The notebook revealed what words never had. Later that day, when he returned home tired and drained, he noticed something different the moment he stepped inside. The house felt unusually quiet. Everyone looked at him differently, like they were seeing him for the first time. He tried to act normal. He put his bag down, washed his hands, and asked how everyone was doing. But no one answered immediately. Instead, they watched him with soft eyes. The kind of eyes people have when they see something they didn't expect. He sensed something was off. He looked around the room, confused. Then someone came forward holding the notebook. His heart nearly stopped. The sight of that notebook in someone else's hands made his stomach tighten. He knew instantly what had happened. His secret months of sacrifices, struggles, long nights, quiet tears. Hidden responsibilities were no longer hidden. He froze. No one spoke for a moment. The silence felt heavy. Then, gently, they asked, "Why didn't you tell us?" He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to explaining himself. He wasn't used to being the one who needed help. He swallowed hard and looked down, unable to meet their eyes. "I didn't want to worry anyone," he said softly. His voice sounded small, almost fragile. "You were doing all this alone?" someone asked. He nodded slowly. "And you didn't tell anyone even once?" Another nod. "Why?" He took a long breath, trying to find the right words. "I didn't want to be a burden. Everyone has their own worries. I thought, if I just stayed strong a little longer, things would get better. I didn't want anyone to feel guilty or stressed because of me." His honesty broke something inside the room. No one had realized how much he had been carrying, how many nights he had stayed awake, or how many sacrifices he had made quietly. To them, he was always the strong one, the calm one, the reliable one. They didn't know he was slowly breaking behind that calmness. Someone stepped closer and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You shouldn't have gone through all this alone." He didn't respond. He didn't know how to. After months of hiding everything, the sudden attention felt overwhelming. He wasn't used to being seen. He wasn't used to people asking about his feelings. He was used to giving, not receiving. That evening, the whole family sat together. For the first time, he spoke honestly. Not about every detail, he still held back some things, but he shared enough for them to understand how much he had struggled. He talked about the extra jobs, the skipped meals, the long walks to save money, the sudden bills, the sacrifices he made so no one else had to suffer. They listened quietly. No interruptions, no judgment, only understanding. He didn't cry, but his voice shook several times. It was the first time he had admitted to anyone, even to himself, that he was tired. Really tired. The kind of tired that settles deep inside a person. The kind that doesn't go away with sleep. For months, he had been fighting alone. Now, finally, people knew the truth he tried so hard to hide. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house changed. People became more attentive. They watched him more carefully. When he woke up early, someone else woke up too. When he tried to take care of everything, someone else stepped in. They talked to him gently, making sure he wasn't carrying too much on his own. At first he felt awkward. He wasn't used to receiving help. He wasn't used to sharing responsibility. He kept saying, "It's okay, I can manage." But they didn't let him go back to hiding. Slowly, he began to realize something important. He didn't have to carry everything alone. Sharing responsibility didn't make him weak. Accepting help didn't make him a burden. People cared about him not because of what he did, but because of who he was. One afternoon, he found someone adding money to a small jar on the shelf. It was the family's idea, everyone putting in a little amount regularly to create a safety fund. Something he had always wanted but could never create because he spent everything on others. Seeing that jar made him realize he wasn't alone anymore. Even small things changed. Someone would hand him a cup of tea before he could make it himself. Someone else would remind him to rest. When he came home tired, people asked him how his day was, and they meant it. They wanted to understand, not just ask politely. Slowly, the weight he carried began to lighten. Not because the problems disappeared, but because he finally had people walking beside him. His silent world wasn't silent anymore. His struggles weren't hidden anymore.